Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Pleased to meet you. I hope everyone can hear me. Let me know if you can hear my microphone before we start. So we're going to just go back to some of the questions that we weren't able to cover previously. We had one session off because I was sick. I'm sorry about that. Previously, someone asked me about the Hillside Hermitage. It was an anonymous question. And at first I said that I wouldn't be able to answer because I didn't know enough about this organization. I have since done a little bit of research. Now, I can't speak as to their conduct, so I don't know anything about what actually goes on in this hermitage. As far as I know, then they have a facility in the mountains of Slovenia. The teacher as well is Slovenian, and he's a Theravada monk. But they also have kind of spread out organizations or gatherings or meetings in other countries throughout the world. Having listened to his teachings, then I can very clearly say that he is quite learned. That is, for a Westerner, he's quite learned in the Theravada Pali Canon. And also he's got a really good way of relating to modern people, kind of lay people. I guess because he's been brought up in the West, or it's like Eastern Europe, I suppose, Slovenia. He's exposed to our culture, etc. And so he's a good way of relating to people. He's also a very relatable individual. And his take on the Theravada Dharma is very authentic. So the first thing that came to mind when I heard about this organization is that what happens often, because they're a splinter group, right? They're non-associated with any monastery. Sometimes they kind of reinvent the Dharma to suit their own kind of culture, etc. And that's generally a mistake. You have to find the ways in which the Dharma speaks truth to individuals and in the context of the modern world, but not change it. For example, fundamentally change the basis of the Dharma, because essentially these issues like the negative emotions, they don't change, right? In ancient Rome, people had greed and anger, and jealousy and pride, and today we still have these things, but the way that it sort of manifests to us appears differently on the outside, right? Because of technology, because of society. And there's also always a societal shift, right? So, and this is something people don't appreciate. For example, there's been this shift towards transgender in modern times, and a lot of kind of, we could say, conservative people really resist that. They find it kind of disgusting, and they're very anti-trans, for example. But these are natural shifts. They've happened throughout the centuries. For example, in the Buddha's own time, then there was acceptance of transgender. It's so much so that it's actually written into the monastic rules, if you can believe that. There's actually rules for people who change gender. Once they've become a monk, for example, if they become a woman, then they have to adopt the nuns' rules. But they can only do that 7 times. So it's very specific in the Vinaya. And it wouldn't be if, like 2,600 years ago, that wasn't acceptable. And for example, if we take Indian culture to this day, if you have a marriage, then you have to have like 2 transvestites in the marriage. It's part of the way they do. It's like, could you imagine, right? In a Baptist church in Georgia. And you show up and it's like, where's the transvestites? But that's just totally normal for them. So these are cultural things, right? And we react to them. So these cultural things naturally change, and we have to, talk about the Dharma in relationship to modern concepts and things, right? For example, if you have somebody who has very bad karma. So some people have kind of really bad karma and they keep making more bad karma. And the way I kind of think about it, what it's like, is if you go around with somebody who's got really bad karma, it's a bit like a friend who's a meth addict. I don't know how many of you have experienced this. As I was a musician before, then I met people who are on all kinds of different drugs. And somebody I knew was like a meth addict. And if you go around with a meth addict, it's like chaos. Things always go wrong. There's always crazy stuff going on. And it's a bit like that for somebody who's got really bad karma. It's like chaos follows them. You know, so you can kind of relate this to our modern experience. That's not changing the Dharma. So returning to this Hillside Hermitage, then my first worry was that they were reinventing Buddhism, because this is often what happens when you get these splinter groups. So having had a look, he isn't doing that whatsoever. He's presenting Theravada Dharma in a very authentic way. And the statements he makes are very, very accurate and precise for the Hinayana, this vehicle, this foundational vehicle. There's different presentations in the Mahayana, right? For example, in the Hinayana, it says that for example, somebody who is a hermaphrodite, like there's different terms actually. So you could see somebody who's a hermaphrodite or an androgen, that sort of thing. Then they can't become monks and nuns. But it specifically says in the Mahayana discipline, text on discipline, that in our tradition that is possible. So there are differences between these different schools, but what he's presenting is quite authentic, and he's very relatable. Like I say, I can't speak to conduct in his organization. For example, Theravadins are quite strict, right? So I can't say that somebody hasn't been like slapped over the head or something like that for misbehaving, and they might have some, law court case going on. I don't know anything about that. But I do know if you look at his website or the YouTube channel, and you listen to some of the teachings, and they're very accurate and quite inspiring, really. And they kind of live out in the forest. It's really, it's really inspiring, because that's the way that the Sangha, the religious community at the time of the Buddha, used to live. The term was go from the home into homelessness. So they literally leave their village, their family home behind, and they go live out in the trees, in the forest or in a cave somewhere. If you visit India around Pune, this area, Maharashtra, then you will find these old Buddhist communities, and they would literally like dig holes in the side of the mountain and just live in caves or live under trees. And they're kind of doing that in Slovenia. In fact, I have a friend, or you could say a student, who is a Theravada monk. He's a Westerner, he's from Romania, I believe, and I recommended that he go join this organization because it would be quite suitable for him. So Dharma Bomb is in a tent and it's raining. I think that's wonderful. We should all live in tents, really. We wouldn't complain so much, right, if we were used to being a Dharma Bomb. You develop resilience. And that's what these monks used to do, right? These Theravada monks. They would just have like we're really bad. I'm Tibetan Buddhist tradition. We're quite bad, really. We're quite spoiled. Most of the Tibetan monks in Nepal are quite fat, and they all have iPhones, which is quite funny. But these guys are living a really kind of like simple life. They're living like Dharma bombs, and it's really useful for your practice. Really, really useful. I mean, when I went into retreat, the first 4-year retreat, before I went into retreat, I wanted to, can I have a Mongolian yurt? Absolutely. Sonia's asking, can we sleep in a yurt? Yurt's a really excellent way of practicing the Dharma. In fact, if you look at sorry for getting distracted, but the chat feed's going away there. If you look at the Eastern Tibetans in the Kham region, I think your husband is from this area, Sonia, then they're all nomads and they live in tents. And so there's some really amazing teachers, like for example, Khenpo Paga, and he spent all his time living in tents. He would teach the Dharma and he would only live in tents and things like that. In fact, in this tradition, we call Karma Kagyu, then around the 18th century, we basically were a nomadic tradition. It was intentional. So they had something called the Great Encampment, and that was where the entire, it's like this gathering. It's Karmapa, who's like the Pope of our tradition, right? And then all his, equivalent to bishops and things. So these senior ranking monks and meditators, then they just traveled from place to place in tents. And the other thing that's quite phenomenal about that is that they were vegetarians. And if you know anything about Tibet, it's almost impossible to be a vegetarian. So that is really quite inspiring, that they managed to be, in the 18th century in Tibet, where it was basically a nomadic culture, they managed not to eat any meat. So, you know, it just shows really. But this living a simple life is really important. So you might be familiar with the other channel called the Chainsaw Lama, and I'm building a hermitage, and I release videos there as well. Funnily, then the Chainsaw Lama channel has now overtaken Theory of Samsara, and actually I thought that was quite predictable, because people can relate more to you know, somebody who kind of doesn't look different, right? Somebody in monk robes, and then they kind of think, well, what's this all about? Is this some kind of cult? But on the hermitage, then I've got to work and do dangerous stuff, and I can't wear my robes, so I wear work clothing, and I give kind of general advice. But the whole idea there is to be able to live in the forest, you know, and be comfortable, but to reduce the amount of distraction to worldly luxury and this sort of thing. It really helps. Like I say, when I went into retreat, hello Arthur, when I went into retreat the first time, then I got rid of all my stuff. I sold, gave away, or in the end threw away anything I couldn't get rid of. And it was really beneficial to me. And then living for 4 years in a small 9x9 room, 9x9 feet, not meters, without a bed, because we sleep sitting up, and just practicing the Dharma was so beneficial to practice. Just no distraction, right? We don't have even we didn't even have a telephone, let alone a mobile phone or something like that. No computers, and we could just practice, you know. And the food was nourishing, but very simple. These things all help. So these guys from the Hillside Hermitage are doing that. If you look at their videos, they're sitting, you know, they're sitting under a ruined wall or under a tree, and they're just discussing the spiritual path, experience, and meditation. So I would recommend you go to this YouTube channel, and everything I heard him say so far, I haven't had time to watch a lot of videos, but everything I've heard him say is authentic. In terms of the Theravadian tradition, it will contradict some of the things that I say about Mahayana Buddhism. Next week, on Thursday for the premiere, then I'm going to release a video that talks a little bit about these 3 different traditions, and some little detail about what they're like to help you kind of decide what will be best for you. Because really it is the case that these traditions some are better for some people and some are better for others. And so Winnie asks, why do you sleep sitting up? Well, it's partly to do, the idea is when you go into retreat, this is a Tibetan thing, it's like I'm going to go into retreat and I'm just going to be diligent and never stop until I get enlightened. In fact, the reason why we use 3 years and 3 fortnights is because it's a calculation of the purification of the winds and channels in the body. And if you do that and you purify, you know, if you basically remain with the authentic nature and hold the winds for 3 years and 3 fortnights, then you will become enlightened. Of course we don't become enlightened because it's really difficult, right? So part of that is like you just keep meditating through the night. So you're literally sitting in your box, and when you're in your box, you do dream and sleep yoga. Of course it's very difficult to actually do that, you know. Ideally that's what we're aiming for. But it's largely aspirational. So I'm not even going to lie down to sleep. I'm just going to practice non-stop for 4 years because I've just got to get in line. That's the idea. And this is the purpose of sleeping sitting up. For example, we do this tantric practice. It's a Uttara Tantra, highest yoga tantra. And for that time, 7 months, you don't wash. You know, it's like you try not to sleep or wash or brush your teeth or anything like this. Just ignore all worldly concerns and apply yourself to practice. And so after 7 months, everybody's really stinking, looking I've got a picture. I posted it on the channel of what we looked like after 7 months, with uncut nails and looking filthy. And when my mother saw it, she was horrified. She was like, "Oh, you look really dirty," because she hates dirt. Yeah, so when he says you fall over, but it's a box. The thing we sleep in is called a meditation box. Yeah, and it kind of like, it's shaped so you're trapped in the box. So your legs are in lotus position and you can't stretch them out. So it holds you in position and there's a back on it. So you've got something to lean onto. It was a bit difficult because at some point after retreat, then we went to India and joined the Munalam, and I was sleeping in a tent there. And it was really difficult to try to do this in a tent because the tent side is like this, So really, this box is really good. And if you don't have a box, you can use the corner of a room. But also, it's likewise quite difficult. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So, Josh Rose asks, as someone who plays music and follows Dzogchen teachings, I'm interested if there are any tantric or Dzogchen teachings regarding music making. I have read briefly about Vinapa, the musician, Mahasiddha. Did any of these lineages or teachings survive? Very grateful for your channel and videos. Be well. So Josh is from the United Kingdom. So we've got these Mahasiddhas, right? There are these famous Indian tantric practitioners, and they all have these different characteristics. Now, something you have to understand about all of the Mahasiddhas is that they kind of like had worldly activities. Like famously, Tilopa used to grind sesame seeds, right? And when they became practitioners or when they became enlightened, they didn't change their worldly activities. They used their worldly activities as the path. It's called lamkir, means bringing it on the path. Now this is specifically related to Mahamudra practice, but also it's an esoteric teaching on Mahamudra meditation. And that's kind of difficult for many people to understand. But basically, we have this idea that we need to do something to get enlightened, right? We need to sit on our cushion, meditate, or we need to chant, say mantras. Now, part of the realization of Mahamudra is realizing that all appearances are luminosity. All appearances are enlightened mind. That they are nothing other than that, right? And so there is nothing specific to do. I mean, you hear all these kind of instructions, right? Don't think, don't reflect, don't change. It's just as it is. The term in Tibetan, Rangbap, means as it is. Or it kind of means as it falls. Like if you were to take a silk scarf and then you just let it go, it would float down and just land. That's the kind of meaning of as it is. And it's also directly related to what actual Mahamudra meditation is. When you hear most people talk about Mahamudra, they talk about techniques. It shows they don't understand what it's talking about. So now Vinapa was a musician. He was like a prince. Often these Mahasiddhas are princes or things like that, people like kings who give up their kingdom for the Dharma, for the spiritual path. And his parents said, he just spends all the time playing the lute. And let's get him to learn the Dharma or something like that. So they brought a teacher. And the teacher said that he would give him a sadhana. Sadhana is this tantric practice, or it's kind of a liturgy, technically. But really what you do in tantric practice is you do this deity meditation practice. It's called creation stage. And he said, I don't need any other practice other than my lute, right? This kind of harp thing. It's like a 7-stringed lute or something like that. And so his teacher, who was called Buddhapa, taught the prince a musical sadhanas, whereupon he initiated the prince and instructed him to meditate continuously upon the sound of the instrument. Right? So he's using that activity, whatever it is, as the focus of his practice. That's the method side. But he must free himself of all distinction between the sound that is struck and what the mind perceives. Now, this is related to what is called these three wheels, right? So we've got like the actor, the thing that's being acted upon, and the action itself. And what is taught in these higher levels of Buddha Dharma is that we are free from this distinction, right? It's about non-duality. Like there's no doer, there's nothing being acted upon, there's nothing being done, that sort of thing. And so what practice is this freedom from this belief in these things, freedom from these three spheres, you could say, spheres of perception that involve duality, which involved this subject-object dichotomy. And so for him it was done through music, excuse me. Free himself between distinctions between the sound that is struck and what the mind perceives, to cease all interference with the sound, conceptualization, critical and judgmental thought, and to contemplate only on pure sound. So again, as I was saying, right, there's no wanting to change it. There's no conceptualizing or thinking about it. There's no judgment involved. There is only this sound that is purity. And what this is referring to, again, this is an esoteric teaching, right? This is referring to the view of the Vajrayana, which is called pure vision. So this is these Mahasiddhas, their lives are exemplary. They're used to show us how practice is nothing other than the world that we perceive. Really, it's nothing other than the current moment of experience. It is nothing other than the current moment of experience, however, without grasping. That's what we call the Dharmakaya. And it is the foundation of this Mahamudra Dzogchen practice. But again, most people don't understand that. They just think it's a series of techniques. So when you see people teaching, Mahamudra, then you just meditate on a stone or something like that, right? They think that's Mahamudra. That's not Mahamudra. Or they meditate on the current moment of awareness. That's a technique. That's not Mahamudra. Mahamudra is recognition of the true nature of phenomena. Yeah. Recognition of the authentic nature of everything that abides. So Josh is asking this question in the context of the musical aspect. But again, the musical aspect here is being used as an example, right? For example, there's the story of the Buddha sitting on the side of the river, and then he heard a musician go by talking to his student on a raft, right? And the musician was saying to the student, if the string is too tight, it will make a very harsh and unpleasant sound. And if it's too loose, it won't make any sound at all. You have to tune it just right in the middle. And this is said to be what inspired the Buddha to teach the middle way. So it's kind of similar, right? These are exemplary or metaphors, that sort of thing. So it's not so much about the music. For example, in the other siddhas, one is called Kukuripa, right? And it means dog lover. So there's this crazy Mahasiddha who lived on an island with all these bitches, and he had sex with them. Now to us, that is abhorrent, right? For most people. We would just think, oh, that's totally disgusting. But it's not about the action. What it's teaching us is an esoteric message, right? Because this view of purity is this view that is beyond the concepts of good and bad. And so this dog lover, Mahasiddha, is showing this aspect where whatever activity you engage in, that is the Mahamudra. It all depends on recognition, or it all depends on wisdom, whether there's insight or not. It's not really about understanding a concept. That's another mistake people make. People make two major mistakes. They think it's a technique. So for example, we focus on playing the musical instrument. We think, oh, playing the musical instrument is some form of high practice. Well, it's just the method, right? Like we have desire for music. Like this desire for the sense pleasures, traditionally in the Hinayana, and the foundational vehicle, is taught to be a negative thing. Getting carried away by sense perceptions, right? Beautiful smells and sights and sounds, that sort of thing. In the Sutra Paramitrayana, then we take these things and we offer them to the Buddha. We transform them into something positive, right? We offer everything that we experience that is beautiful up to the three jewels. But in the Vajrayana, what we're doing is we're recognizing things for the way they are. There's 3 levels. There's abandonment, transformation, and there's recognition. Abandonment, exclusion is this Hinayana vehicle. So Hillside Hermitage, these are Theravada monks. They go off, live in the forest, they cut themselves off from the sources of desire. In the Sutra Paramitrayana, the Mahayana, then we transform these things, pleasant experiences, we make them positive by either making them offerings or making them as a kind of method to change our motivation to this bodhicitta motivated, this Mahayana motivation. And in the Vajrayana, then we have pure vision. We see things to be pure as they are. It's not as simple as just convincing yourself that everything's fine, right? So traditionally what people do is they hear about the Vajrayana, all things are pure, there's no good or bad, and they think, great, I can go out and get drunk, right? Because the kleshas, the negative emotions, are actually wisdom. What we don't think is, oh great, there's no good or bad. I can go have sex with some dogs. Or I can eat shit. We don't think that, right? Because we have, we think eating shit is terrible and we don't want to do it, right? So the very basis of our practice is fake. So this is what these teachings on the Mahasiddhas are giving us. And in this one, it's about the musical instrument. So it's not so much about the music, where Josh is kind of focusing on the music element as if it's something special. But that's just an appearance. That's just an example. Some of the other Mahasiddhas are scholars, right? There's these dark Mahasiddhas as well. So it's just showing us that all experience are enlightened activity. All experience are the Buddha mind. We have to come to realize that. It's no good just pretending. And in fact, it's quite dangerous. Because as we know, I've said this before, if you look at some of the videos I've done on tantric practices, secret practices, then there's all kinds of things, right? Even like eating human flesh or eating corpses, that sort of stuff, right? Quite disgusting. But there's a kind of purpose for that. We have to get beyond the mind that clings to these notions of good and bad and purity and that sort of thing. And if we have that, we have what's called pure vision. It's very difficult to gain pure vision, and so it's dangerous. And so if we use, let's say, union practice, where we use a consort as the basis of our practice, if we are spiritually immature, then all that will happen is we'll just increase our desire. We'll have more craving. Like it's somebody who's like an alcoholic. You can't let them practice alcohol. There's a practice in Tibetan Buddhism. It's actually also in Indian tradition, Nepal, that sort of thing, where they use alcohol as their practice. You take somebody who's basically a recovering alcoholic and say, oh, this is a great practice for you. Like in a couple of days, their life's going to be ruined, right? And they're going to be lying sort of under a dumpster somewhere in the street. It's going to just ruin their life. They're not going to get anywhere. So these are actually quite difficult practices to do. Something you really need to think about. Now, not to put Josh off too much, then in terms of his own musical interest and his own musical kind of talents, then you can use that as your meditation. In fact, music is very much a form of meditation. I know this. I used to be a musician. Study is also a form of meditation. It's a very powerful form of developing mental stability. But music is as well, especially if you read scores. So there's Snow, he's a musician, he's a composer, and this ability to focus on the music and stay in the flow is a very powerful form of practice. It's shamatha. It's very similar to Tai Chi in many ways. It's keeping in this flow with precision. So that's one thing. You can use your practice, your music, as a means of developing insight, but you will need guidance. But at very least, you can use your music and your art, your expression, as a way of developing shine. So remember, there's the stability of the mind, shamatha, which is like calming the mind and stabilizing the mind, and there's vipassana, which is insight. So that's where you develop wisdom. Wisdom in the Theravada tradition is associated with recognizing the 3 signs of existence, right? Non-self, impermanence, and suffering. In the Zen tradition, it's about recognizing emptiness, or you could say emptiness and compassion in union. And in the Vajrayana, it's about recognizing luminosity, whatever you want to call it. There's different kinds of insight, but there's 2 different types of meditation. There's this kind of resting the mind, and then there's the development of wisdom. And the resting the mind, you can use all kinds of focuses for that. Like you can focus on your music, you can study a text, you can go to the art gallery. Looking at art is a very meditative process, if you can just stabilize the mind on the experience without conceptualizing about it. But also these things can be used for developing wisdom. A little bit more difficult. You kind of need guidance and you need a teacher to do that. But they can eventually lead to the development of wisdom. So Josh can use his music as a focus for his meditation. But there is, he says, is there any lineage? Well, there is kind of, right? We've got something called the dohas. So these are sacred songs. And Saraha was the kind of original, I suppose. It's an Indian tradition. The most famous will be Milarepa. And there is a very long text called the Songs of Milarepa. It was translated many, many years ago by a Chinese translator, and it has many, many, many different songs from Milarepa. So Milarepa famously didn't teach the Dharma. People would come to him and he would spontaneously just sing songs, right? You know, and they were all about the meaning of the Dharma. There is a book called The Songs of Realization that was translated by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, and his followers, they basically sing these songs. I did this practice myself. I did these retreats. And previously I memorized many, many, many of Milarepa songs, and we used to go out into nature, on the beach, on the top of the cliffs, and sing these songs. It's quite interesting because part of the somebody says I'm a punk metalhead. You can use punk, you can use metal, but so part of this practice of singing these songs is to overcome hope and fear. And so if you go out into public with a bunch of people and start singing these weird songs, it takes a lot of courage, and you have to overcome your kind of shyness, etc. And so it's actually quite useful. I'll tell you one story to give you an example. This will give you an example. So there's this guy, Ari. He's a really famous translator. He translates for the Karmapa and all sorts of people. He's a really good translator, and he's a Dharma teacher. And he's one of Khenpo Tsultrim's students, and they go around singing all over the place. It's quite embarrassing, right? So they took them to this tourist place. It was where I used to live in Cornwall, and they went to walk around. It's like the cliff tops, and there's a lighthouse. But there's like hundreds and hundreds of tourists in summer. So they went there, and the teacher said, "Okay, let's sing this song, and you go first. You lead us." So he was walking along singing this song, right? Friends are empty forms, just like a water. They're all like that. The song's really cheery. They're happy, clappy, right? And then he turned around, and they just stayed behind. So he was like walking off on his own, singing like a crazy man, and they were all hanging back. I said they were going to join him. So it was like that. It's to develop this kind of like mind that isn't afraid and doesn't have fear. So this is a living tradition. In the Buddha Dharma, through the Tibetans, and there's quite a few people who do these songs. The ones I'm talking about specifically are Songs of Realization, as translated by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso. You can get this text. I have a PDF somewhere, and they're quite good translations of the Milarepa songs. Then people will add their melodies to them, and there's all kinds of melodies that have been used, and some of them are quite cheesy. Some of them are like jazz. Some of them are quite nice, very kind of sonorous, etc. There was one written by a music teacher, and it sounded like the sort of thing that a music teacher would sing. Sentient beings do not exist. It was like these scales or something like that. It's really quite funny, but they're really good because when you sing the meaning, that meaning goes into your head and you think about it a lot, and that helps you to contemplate, and it can lead to realizing wisdom, definitely. And you can do a Milarepa song, death metal, punk, whatever you want. You can take these songs and do them to whatever melody you like. The one thing I will say is be careful. It's okay when you're in public with lay people, but be careful if you're in front of any Tibetan teachers, because some of them get quite annoyed. There's Sanjay Nimba Rinpoche. He's a really excellent teacher, and he's really serious about the Dharma. And so his students, Western students, came up and they'd gotten into the habit of singing Milarepa songs, and they thought they'd make an offering to him. And so they went up and started singing this Milarepa song, like a kind of cabaret song. And he was so pissed off. He said, "You Westerners, you think this is some kind of game?" So, you have to keep it in the right context, because you don't want to sort of like offend people. Like, you're not going to walk into a sort of Gelugpa university and burst out in song. They'll just think you're crazy. Of course, if you want to practice to overcome your fear and your shyness, etc., and be kind of open and unfazed, that's fine. And also, if you've recognized the view of Mahamudra, then you can do what you like, right? Like I say, there's this crazy Mahasiddha who had a bunch of girlfriends who were dogs. Of course, what they say is, because this is in the story of Marpa. Yeah, I'm sure this topic isn't what so many people want to hear. It's probably pretty gross. But, everybody thought, who's that crazy guy living on that island? But when Marpa went there, he realized that all these dogs were actually dakinis. They were like, angels kind of thing. So anyway, whatever the story is, there's an esoteric or a didactic message there, right? It's trying to teach us something else. And it's kind of hard to understand unless you know a little bit about what Mahamudra meditation is. And so it's not like some kind of wayward, crazy, careless practice. That's what most Westerners end up thinking, and then it causes a lot of problems. Right? We've heard lots of problems that have happened in Tibetan Dharma centers just because of this point. Because people are taking this really high view, they don't understand it, and they try to practice it. That's a mistake. It's a huge mistake to teach someone a high-level practice or view when they're not ready for it. And then it's the fault of the teacher. Like many teachers in Tibetan Buddhism have done this. Also Hindu teachers, Osho did this. He taught all his students very high-level view, and it's not suitable. You don't teach it to 10,000 people, right? There's going to be one person or two people who are able to practice this, and you teach it to them and you teach it privately. And in general, you'll find that people who really authentically do these practices, then they seem quite, on the outside, they seem quite conservative. They don't kind of give the game away. And when you teach it in public to many people, what they do is you end up with the sort of thing Osho had, where there's just people randomly, having sex in public, left, right, and center, and just doing whatever they want, and then ending up really traumatized, right? So you have to be careful. The most dangerous thing on the spiritual path is to teach high views to people who aren't ready for them. So he says, is there a lineage? Yes, there's this lineage. But also there's, for example, Chu, this practice of the drum and the thigh bone flute, boom, 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 where they practice in graveyards. This is spiritual music, right? So in general, for example, for a monk, a Theravadan tradition, whatever, we take a vow not to play music, like entertainment. It's like, music for entertainment. But we chant, and in Tibetan Buddhism, we have a lot of sacred music. If you're interested in this Tibetan sacred music, then you'll find that it appears on a lot of, for example, Werner Herzog's films. He has a lot of Tibetan sacred music. It's quite crazy sounding. So in retreat for 4 years, we did this every day with all these strange instruments. With drums and cymbals and these big radong. They're like, Sonia will know about this because they have Swiss horns, right? These long horns. Like that. And it's all kind of like circular breathing and overtone. So we do play music, but it's like, it's not music for entertainment. It's transforming this music into an offering, or in terms of the Vajrayana, it's more like the sound of the Dharmakaya. It's something that's supposed to encourage realization. If you haven't heard any Tibetan ritual music, I suggest you have a look. You'll find it online. The sadhana music, it's quite unique, quite special. But that's not the same as what Josh is talking about, like playing your songs and music. But as I said earlier, you can use your expression, your art, painting, whatever it is, as a form of meditation. And then in that way, transform the ordinary to the sacred. So we've got an anonymous question here. What is meant by Samadhi Sila? So I think what this person is getting this term from, I can't be sure, but there's what we call the 6 paramitas, right? Yeah, the 6 transcendent perfections. Now, everyone should know this. Anybody who's been in my classes should know this. Right, Mary? So the first one, generosity, discipline. We've got patience, we've got diligence, we've got concentration and intelligence. So the general presentation is these 6 transcendent perfections. This is the path of application of bodhicitta. And yeah, Mary's smiling. Actually, she got quite a good mark on her test. And there's the 10 perfections. But there's this classification of the perfections into 36, and that's like the generosity of generosity, the generosity of discipline, the generosity of patience, and so you've got 2 called concentration, which is samadhi, and you've got discipline. So this is the the discipline of concentration. So what they're getting here is one of these pairs out of this group of 6 times 6. So you can pair all of them up, right? Patience of patience, discipline of discipline, diligence of diligence, right? If you understand. And the topic itself is kind of complicated. Like, what exactly is the generosity of generosity? And in the text it does go into detail, but I won't go into it here. Even though it goes into some minimal detail about what each of one of these are, then it's not exactly clear. So what we know is it's for example, you've got the discipline of concentration, which is, discipline is the way we restrain the body and apply ourselves to virtue. So it's the discipline required in order to meditate. Okay, so we also got like the discipline required in order to engage in generosity. For example, you can't cling to your possessions, you have to give them away, and then you have to go through hardship in order to give in generosity, especially if it's transcendent generosity, right? And there's the intelligence of generosity, for example, right? So we've got the intelligence, which is like if I'm walking down the street and I see a fentanyl addict and I think, oh, you must want fentanyl here. I mean, that's like lacking intelligence. That's not going to help them out. Like somebody I was talking to last night said they saw some homeless guy and he gave him a croissant, right? That's like intelligence of generosity, because if I just give him some money, then he might just go out and buy some booze or buy some drugs. But if I feed him or give him some coffee, at least he'll be warm and he'll be fed for a few minutes. And then on top of that, you think, well, if I feed him now, then tomorrow he'll be hungry. So how can I help this person? You know, through education. Ultimately, in the Buddha Dharma, this intelligence of generosity is to teach somebody the Dharma. Because by that, then they, lifetime after lifetime, they will not be lacking in resources and they will progress on the path. So when this anonymous questioner asks, what is the Samadhi of Sila? It's one of these pairs. Samadhi Sila means the discipline of concentration or meditation. Can Buddhism be practiced by an atheist, agnostic? Would you consider it to be an atheistic religion? So Buddhism is technically atheist. And you say, well, what do you mean? Because you do daily meditation practice. So theistic religions essentially believe in an all-powerful creator God, for instance, right? Somebody who's responsible for the whole universe and everything in it. And we refute this in Buddhism. And when we talk about devas and gods, we're not talking about this kind of God who existed before the universe, right? And is responsible for everything. When we talk about devas, the best way to think about it is to think about highly advanced civilizations on other planets. For example, you could have a civilization where they no longer have any suffering. They can just induce pleasure and well-being directly into the mind. Like, this is totally plausible. Today, our chemical kind of research is producing all kinds of medicines. And although we're not very good at it, we can induce various kinds of states, right? Chemically. So we can inject something or take some sort of substance and For example, the military can use a substance to make somebody feel terror and dread as a kind of a way of torturing them. So we have these techniques. Now, of course, some civilization that's thousands of years more advanced than us, then they could directly just produce experiences of bliss, well-being, and joy in their citizens. In fact, I mean, it's quite plausible that we could think, well, actually the body is too fallible. We can just put their consciousness into like a computer or even into some kind of network, crystal network, and they could live forever and just experience peace and well-being. So a deity is like that, like super advanced alien civilization that no longer has any suffering. And so they kind of just get carried away by all their pleasure, etc. Right? So that's what we talk about when we talk about deities. We talk about advanced beings who have advanced technology or powers, personal miraculous powers, and they have too much joy and pleasure. And because of that, they're not very good at practicing the Dharma. They don't suffer. So Buddhism is atheistic. In fact, we refute the existence of a creator God. And that's what theistic religions are. You know, my God created the universe, all the gods are bad. We totally reject that. Would I say that Buddhism is agnostic? Not really. It is partially. The idea with agnosticism is that, well, I'll wait till I see the evidence kind of thing. I'm going to keep the boat out. I'm not going to make my decision unless I get some proof. So partially Buddhism is compatible with this way of thinking, and agnostics make very good Buddhists. Because the Buddha taught that you've got to check things out, right? The Buddha famously said that don't just accept it out of veneration, right, and respect, just because I said so. Look into it yourself. And, you know, the way a goldsmith tests gold, or a scientist, a chemist tests things to see if they're true or not. And so agnosticism is very kind of good if you're going to be a Buddhist. But there are some things essentially, there's some things you need in order to be a Buddhist. Now, it's not saying that all Buddhists are pure Buddhists. In fact, most aren't. So there's something called the highest worldly view. And in Buddhism, this is taught to be the kind of baseline for all spirituality. You need this. The highest worldly view, so it's a worldly view, it's not a religious view. Highest worldly view is the belief in karma, cause and effect, so causality, and also a belief in past and future lives. So for many people, that's already difficult. I think most of us can accept that there isn't anything that arises that doesn't have a prior cause. So the Buddha taught that. That's the fundamental essence of karma. Kind of easier for us to accept, right? Most people talk about karma. Problem is we have a kind of funny way of thinking about karma. We see karma to be cosmic retribution. It's like if somebody we don't like bumps their head, we think, oh, karma. It's not like that. It's causality, right? You know, so anyway, big topic, but many people kind of can accept karma. But most Westerners have trouble with the idea of past and future lives. So that means, to start off with, it's quite difficult to be a pure Buddhist. And then there's something called the Four Seals, or the Four Seals that signify the true Dharma. So there are two aspects to being a Buddhist. There's two aspects to being a Buddhist. Excuse me. One is to have taken refuge in the three jewels. If you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right, this Buddham Sarvanam Gacchami, you hear this prayer they say, right? Where it's like, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in Sangha. If you take that refuge, then you are nominally a Buddhist. But in order to truly be a Buddhist, you also need to hold this view, these four aspects of this view. And that's quite difficult, because for many Buddhists, then Buddha and all that is kind of like a theistic religion. Like most of the people who live in the high mountains in the Himalayas, then for them Buddha is basically a god, and all the Vajrayana gods are basically gods, and they pray to them, oh please, can I have some money, can I have some food? It's just the same as like Christians do, right? We just bow down to God. So they're not really Buddhists. And what are these four seals that signify the Dharma? Well, the first one, I think most of us can accept, is that all composite phenomena, compound phenomena, is impermanent. So I think we can accept that, right? If we've got a stone, we hit it with a hammer, it breaks up, and it loses identity, I will die. anything that's composite. Are there non-composite phenomena? Well, in Buddhism it's taught there's three. There's the two types of cessation, and there's uncompounded space, but that's kind of a difficult topic. But everything else is compound. The computer, me, my cat, everything's impermanent, won't last. Even the sun in our universe, our solar system is going to one day be snuffed out. The mountains will disappear. Everything will disappear, right? Like we think, Elon Musk is so famous, he'll be remembered forever. Nah. 100 years, 1,000 years, everything will be forgotten, right? In fact, the entire universe will go. This is what the Buddha taught. It will come and it will go, and then we'll do it. Universes come and go, and there's infinite universes. So that's not so difficult for us. The second one is that everything fallible is suffering. So what is fallible? Well, fallible is anything that you cling on to on the basis of your negative emotions, primarily on the basis of ignorance, so identification. So if I identify with something as being fixed, it will cause me to suffer. This is very closely related to these three signs of existence that are taught in the Theravada, right? There's the one of impermanence, right? And there's non-self, impermanence, and suffering. So all phenomena that we grasp or we cling to, we crave, that's good. I'll give you a very simple example. I think, wow, I really like pizza. Za is my favorite food. Right? Many people are like that. It's funny because my teacher, sorry, I always go off on tangents, but my teacher thinks all Westerners love pizza. He doesn't understand. So anytime he wants to give a treat to the Westerners, he'll make pizza. But some people don't like pizza. But if you like pizza, you think, pizza is good, pizza is tasty, I love pizza, right? But if you eat like 20 slices, it's no longer good, right? It makes you want to barf. So, okay, Neat likes pizza. Is he wrong? No, if you eat too much of anything, like chocolate cake, doesn't matter. You say to a kid, is candy tasty? Yeah, candy is tasty. And if you force feed them 100 pieces of candy, they're going to throw up. They're going to be like, no, don't give me any more. So it's like, it's suffering because we have this fixed, this is a very simple example. It's, we have this fixed idea, and it's like that. And then when that concept breaks down, it causes us to suffer. In a more complex manner, then let's look at relationships, right? We have this way. We have like a husband, wife, got a partner, and we kind of preconceive them to be a particular way. We make up this story of how they are. And when they act in a way that contradicts it, then we end up in a fight. We don't speak to each other for 2 weeks. It's because we have this idea, like, like my boyfriend is like this, and he loves me, and he likes to do this. And when something happens that upsets our preconditions, then it causes us to suffer. So that's the second one. It's that everything that's fallible is suffering. It's fallible because we grasp onto it with the kleshas. We either crave it, we hate it. Like, for example, we've got somebody like Donald Trump. Some people love him, think he's God, or sent by God, it's like the new Messiah. And some people think he's the devil. And both those people suffer greatly, right? Because the one who thinks he's the Messiah, whenever anything is said that even slightly, contradicts what he said, then they get really, really angry. I get a lot of this on the channel because I get comments from his supporters. And even, like I said in my previous video, that I have compassion for him. That's not a bad thing to have compassion for somebody. But anybody who just thinks somebody might be criticizing him, then they get really angry and they start swearing and like being violent. So it causes them to suffer. And likewise, all the liberals who absolutely hate him, they turn their TV on in the morning, they're like, oh no, I can't take it anymore, right? Okay, so you understand that, right? Everything that's fallible is suffering. We're going to have to speed up because we're almost at the end of our time. So, and then there is a difficult one. I think most people can accept those two, right? And there's a difficult one. And it's like all phenomena lacking self are empty. You can say it like that. So what it means is that all phenomena are impermanent or lack this identity. Because of that, it's an empty thing. And I think most of us can accept that. It's a little bit difficult to understand what emptiness is, but I think we all have a kind of inherent belief in emptiness. We don't want to believe in emptiness, especially when it comes to things we really like, that we don't want to lose. If we don't want to lose a loved one, or if there's our favorite activity, we don't want to think about that as being empty. That's got to do with how we suffer, right, from clinging to things. But that's the third. So I think a lot of Westerners can accommodate that. They like the idea of emptiness. What's the last one? Well, transcendence is peace. So that's a little bit difficult. For maybe Indians and Buddhists, then they naturally believe in awakening. But for us to have a kind of firm belief or conviction in transcendence, that is a state of peace, maybe it's a little bit more difficult because most Westerners are a little bit nihilistic. Funnily, there are many Buddhists who are only nominal Buddhists, and that's because they take refuge in the Buddha, but they don't believe all four of these things. The one they don't believe is this no self, which is odd to think, right? But there's a school of Buddhism called the Vasiputras, and they believe that there is a self or a soul, but it's inconceivable. And that matches very closely with the Vedic presentation, and also other traditions that believes in a soul. It's a real or permanent thing, but it's inconceivable. I think many people have that basic idea. Yeah, Cody says I've struggled with nihilism. Nihilism is the most difficult view to have. It's the most dangerous. Dominica says chocolate cake is love. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think if you eat too much, though, it's not love. It's like makes you want to barf. Okay, so that covers these four views. So basically, are you saying can Buddhism be practiced by an atheist? Definitely. Agnostic. Agnosticism is quite good, but again, we have these basic principles in Buddhism. And if you're an agnostic and you say, well, I can't prove past and future lives, then that's complicated, right? It's difficult to be a Buddhist to believe that. But you can still, it's perfectly fine to, like the Buddha taught anybody. This is a really important point people don't understand. The Buddha never said to anybody, you should be my follower. Because he got a lot of people from Hindu tradition, lots of other religions, who would come to him and ask for advice. And he would give advice to everyone. Basically, he wasn't saying, you have to follow me. People would ask him advice and he'd say, well, this is how it is. There's something called karma. If you do negative stuff, then bad shit's going to happen. That's all. That's the way he talked to people. He didn't do it like that, but he basically just laid out how things are. For example, if you don't control your mind, then you're going to be like a feather in the wind, and you're just going to experience difficulties and go up and down. It's unpleasant. The Buddha didn't say you have to, like in religious, like if you don't keep my rules, you're going to go to hell. That's kind of in Christianity. Then God gave commandments. So morality is a very important point, right? Well, in most religion, morality is based on doctrine, right? So it's a dogmatic position. God said this, so you better do it, right? You must sacrifice this animal at this time in certain religions. Buddha doesn't say that. Buddha didn't say you have to follow these rules. The Buddha said, well, you know what? If you kill, it's going to lead to a negative result because there's the law of causality. He didn't say you have to listen to me. What he said was, if you want to experience happiness in the future, then apply yourself to virtue. And if you apply yourself to negativity, then don't be surprised if you get negative consequences. This is what the Buddha taught. And it's very different from most religions. And he also said, you don't have to believe me, try it out. Right? In the Tibetan teachings, we often talk about these sort of things. Okay, don't believe me? Okay. Go out and just lie. You just lie to everyone that you speak to and see what happens. I don't recommend you do this because people aren't going to appreciate it. But just imagine what it would be like. Just imagine if you did do this practice. Some people do this sort of thing. But remember, you can end up getting a black eye or something. So be careful. But and you could also hurt people really badly, right? You could just say, okay, now I'm going to go out today, and everything I say is going to be a lie. You walk out, you get in your car to go to work, you see your neighbor, hi, oh, I heard your wife just slept with so-and-so. It's like, if you go around lying all day at work, everything you say is a lie, then your life's going to be chaos. By the end of the day, you'll probably be in jail, right? You can have people trying to kill you or really angry with you. And that's kind of the way the Buddha taught. It's like, well, think about it. What would happen? So it's important for us. This is kind of part of the Buddhist process, right? Is to be kind of agnostic. It's kind of like, well, I need to check this out. I need to see what the results are. And then when it comes to things like, for example, I've completely lost my train of thought. So it's 11 o'clock now, and I'm going to have to get going. I suggest that if you're interested in the differences between these different schools, then you watch the premiere next Thursday. I'm going to have to re-record it. I recorded it once already, but the sound was completely crazy for some reason. I think there was it wasn't plugged in, so it was just making loads of noise. I'll have to redo it. But I go into some detail about the different aspects or characters of the 3 different schools, how they arose, and what it's like, for example, to follow these traditions. So you help you to decide that sounds more suitable for me, that kind of thing. That will be on Thursday. So thank you very much for your questions. There are some more really interesting ones coming up, for example, martial arts and Buddhism. We all know about the Shaolin monks, but we'll have to cover that next month. From now on, then the live streams will be on Saturday. They used to be on a Saturday, and that's so we can just keep doing our Sunday meditation. So tomorrow, same time, Sunday meditation. If you're going to join, make sure you bring a little tea light or a candle. And if you can't burn a candle in your apartment because you've got smoke alarms, then take a picture of one on your phone. It works really, really well. It looks really convincing. And really it's the light element anyway, so it's perfectly fine. Don't worry if it's not actually burning. That's okay too. And so I hope to see you all there. And thank you very much for joining us today on this weekend, taking your time off to discuss the Dharma, think about these very important points, and also to share a few laughs. So let's just dedicate the virtue that might have been generated from our interaction for the benefit of all beings, especially those who are suffering, right? The families of the people who died in the recent DC airplane crash. Let's just pray for them, that they can get over their grief and get on with their lives. And also that the kind of negotiations or the ceasefire in Gaza can last, and that these poor afflicted Palestinians can return to somewhat normality. It's hard to imagine they can even do that. And all the people in the world, right, who are less fortunate than us, and also rejoice in the well-being of others. So until next time, then see you later.